Right. So big news of the day, the Pope had passed away this morning.
Yeah.
And so I want to see how you feel about it, and I want to rant a little bit about it.
Is it mean to say I don't really have any strong feeling? I mean, I was like, oh, that's sad. You know, when I heard it, I was like, oh, that's sad. I mean, he was old and...
Well, instead of the loss of life part, let's look up the open opportunity to put a pope in there that knows the position and is a good CEO and a good leader of the church.
Okay.
They should have retired that dude when he first got ill, so that it wouldn't be, we're replacing a pope that died. It would be replacing a pope that couldn't fill the position anymore. So we'll pretend like they retired him like they should have, and talk about how he was as a pope. We're a big fan of him.
I don't know a whole lot about him.
Okay.
I've heard, was he fairly kind of what some would call progressive?
Some would.
Yeah.
Some would say he was had some liberal tendencies.
Yes,
in there.
yes. That was I'm not Catholic and I don't really follow popes much, but from what I heard, he seemed, yes, a little more liberal, a little more outspoken about liberal issues. That's really all I know about him.
Okay. And I'm obviously going to translate this down to, a business and the business of the church. And, the CEO can really only be critiqued by how well they steer the ship. And, I'm sure Democrats like that his liberal tendencies align more with their ideologies. But what is the work output of the church? How do you, if you're going to measure if it's doing a good job, bad job, like what standards are you going to set? And so I would give him probably 2 out of 10 stars.
Oh,
right?
wow.
He's got a 20%. He's definitely got a failure rate, only because I think that he didn't know the position, like almost like the CEO of Kodak, right?
Mm-hmm.
CEO of Kodak saw that digital cameras were making all their money in regular photography, and everybody was saying we're going to go digital, and they were really behind the curve, and they did a really poor job. They did what they wanted to do,
yeah.
But the overall, like, I'm a shareholder of it, and I'm like, did they make the company better by staying traditional or progressive on a certain way? They did a bad job, and I'm judging you based on your inaction or your action, depending on if it makes the company better or not. So the church, especially the Catholic Church, was decimated. Like when you're living in sort of like end times, everything's vice, everything's sin. This is like the Super Bowl for the church. If you had a competent leader, that leader could create a revival only by pointing out, right, what we're going to do to bring the church back into the town square and bring the church back into the community again. They didn't do that. He just went and serviced the woke ideologies and made everybody hate him as far as a leader goes.
I don't even know if you would know anything about this, but I probably coincidentally have heard about people sort of, I don't know if I want to say giving up on, but not happy with the church, the people who I know who are Catholic lately. Mm-hmm. Does that have anything to do with that, or is that just coincidentally that might have just been their own
church
personal...
has a laundry list of marketing and PR nightmares. If they were a company and all the the standards that they're held to and the mistakes they made and the role they played in society, like, I can judge them very harshly as missteps that they've taken over the years. So I look at the leaders to look at the organization as a whole and address where you've gone wrong and bounce back from it and market your way into acceptance. You've got a lot of critics and you're just giving them ammunition. So it would almost be like, we know we're in a lot of trouble, right? We have the whole group of people that will support us, billions and billions of people. And I want to secure the people the foundation of support that I have within my own community and my own congregation. So I'm either going to do one of two things. I'm going to take the majority of those people and I'm going to make their views, their faith, and everything more concrete, or I'm going to alienate half of my foundational members of that. They chose that one. And it was like I said, I mean, I don't disagree that the church is allowed to experiment any way they want to go as far as how they implement the Word of God and the Bible and all of the teachings and ideology. But I don't necessarily think from a marketing standpoint, that was a wise choice. And maybe he wanted to be a martyr and, go in a direction and be reviled for, or revered for his,
was this maybe
courage,
his version of like leaving the 99 to go after the one?
Yeah. Right. And I don't, again, that's fine. right? But the church as a whole needs to make foundational connections between what it is that they're doing and get support from the masses. And it didn't have that support. And so it took a step back. So I just think that this, being that he retired, that they have a chance to bring someone who will look at the church as a whole and give it a rebirth and give it a chance to have some effectiveness. If the overall product is it goes out in the society and it makes society better and it underscores some basic 10 principles that most of us can actually agree with.
So do you have any specifics as to something you would be like, here's what you did and here's what you should have done?
It would be, I would say, the most an honest pope, someone who can say, look, we did some stupid shit. We had an incredible amount of power and wealth, and we squandered it on the institution instead of the action, right? And so, in our area, the Catholic Church had a lot of influence. They bought up a lot of property. They had a lot of money to wield. And so you should, if a company has that much power, you should feel them on every baseball field, at every charity dinner. If you want to make them part of the square, they got to be everywhere. So what were they doing? They were amassing more power and more wealth, but doing it at the expense of the institution rather than flourishing the institution. That's what I disagree with. So that's what I would do is I would make the Catholic Church, I would reinvent what it is that they stand for. Because if you ask normal people, they don't even freaking know. So that's bad marketing if you don't even know what the church is all about.
Yeah. I mean, I'll be honest, the only time I've ever really attended a Catholic mass was probably a family member was getting baptized or getting married or something of that nature.
Yeah. Well, okay. So you got three things here. So the outgoing product, the product of the church is sort of like inspiring in a certain direction, right? Influencing would be a better word. So the Bible is an influencer, the church is an influencer, the Constitution is an influencer. It's meant so that you have something that you can read and refer to and be reminded of to remind you what you should be doing, and then you take action out into the deal. So if you're not in front of me, I can read the thing and know what it is that I should be doing based on what you're presenting. I read the Constitution. I know what the founding fathers, had in mind. I know what I should be doing and what my contribution. I don't have to have someone explain it to me. The referring documents will influence me into what it means to be, part of the American experiment. Right? Church needs to do the same thing. So if you don't know if I can't read the documents and know what you're about, if you just
like your mission statement,
if your evidence, like if you ask the typical person, hey, you're not a Catholic, but what's the Catholic Church do in your community, right? Mm-hmm. What are they all about? And I can only go back and say, well, what do they do in my community? Where they have a public face of the community, and what would you say? Where do you see the Catholic Church?
Maybe like a spaghetti dinner, or a little kind of street festival, something.
Street festival.
Baptisms
they buy properties, maybe feed the poor, right?
Do they around here? I don't know. They may. I don't
They don't do it very publicly, but okay. I'm sure that they do it. But your marketing has to know what you do, and are you just a charitable organization? So you might be doing the things, right?
Yeah.
But if it's an inspiring or influential document, what are you Are you influencing other people to give to the poor, or do you want people just to give you money and then you give to the poor, but you don't have to actually say that's what's happening? You got to figure it out. It's a riddle.
So you think maybe a church, regardless of what the religion is, almost needs to advertise what they do and market it and say,
just like here's
what we do.
But there's two sides of it. Have a mission and know what your mission is, right? Be able to communicate whatever that mission is to the people, so everybody knows what role you play in the deal is the deal of your society and your cities and towns. And then the second thing is, just like my Kodak example, the information you're being presented with, you have to roll with it. So let me ask you this question. So do you think if the new pope comes in there and decides to reinvent the Catholic religion, update it for 21st century, do you think, like Kodak, if they would have updated for what the needs of the community were in digital photography, and the CEO said, you know what, I know this traditionalism, everybody's happy with it, and they really like their pictures right now, But I think we got to start planning for today's stuff. Do you agree that any kind of religious institution should roll with the times and update for today's needs, if that's their role?
I feel like to an extent.
Okay.
Yes. I feel like if you've got sort of this basis that for whatever reason over time becomes no longer relevant, you may start to lose interest. You may start to thin out, become smaller, become a little less popular because you're not sort of reaching anyone who is of today's mindset. At the same time, there's also a very big desire, I think, for a lot of people to remain traditional and sort of old school and be like, hey, this happened. This is what we believed. That doesn't become untrue simply because time changed, And so I feel like they would almost need a really great combination of these are hard set, cornerstones but maybe here's how we'll present it to apply to you.
Well, why do you think then that if you update it to the needs of today, that you have to change the tradition of the message?
No, yeah, I don't think you have to change what it is. Maybe just how you relate it to them.
Okay.
Maybe.
So one of my favorite books did this. Like they had an original 1902 version and they made a 1990 version, and they took a lot of the nouns and verbs that it wouldn't have resonated. So one of the examples was, capitalism was able to move tea leaves from China with 4 cents, and you can have it delivered on your breakfast table. And they referenced a lot of stuff that people don't even do. They don't have a breakfast table and they don't drink tea for breakfast. And the cost of it was so off from today's cost that it made no sense. So they updated it and they used a product that you would bring to your breakfast table at a cost that you would relate to. And when I thought of it, I thought the original story was awesome because I connected it in with the traditions of what it used to be, and I took exception to it, or at least paid acknowledgement to it, that man, these were things that were being talked about 100 years ago, and it still applies today. And the message to me was a more, it wasn't a superficial message; it had some depth to it. And so, if you remove that whole time jump, then I would have never had that epiphany, and I would have lost a little bit of the meaning for me. So I wanted to read both, where I knew that the traditional side still needed to exist so I could get my depth out of it. And I also had, some appreciation that if you updated it, maybe someone who wouldn't have read into the depth at least got influenced by it enough that the messaging actually resonates. So do I keep tradition because I like it, only knowing that the next generation is going to be alienated by the depth that they're not consuming? Or am I willing to give up some of the public facing things to address the people that would actually be consuming it? I don't need the consumption. I don't need you to go out there and pay homage to something that doesn't exist anymore. Almost like what we're doing here. There's a whole traditional group that will only listen to content that's blaring on a terrestrial radio, right? Mm-hmm. In the future, there's going to be broadcast and podcast on the internet, right? Mm-hmm. So there's going to be certain people like, I'm not listening to that hocus pocus podcast stuff. But if the messaging is giving people the ability to talk outwardly to the public, right? Mission accomplished by doing it this way. Mm-hmm. I can still do radio. I don't hate radio. I'm not, opposed to it. Both can exist at the same time without feeling like I alienate the people who don't want to change.
Yeah. And I feel like there's a lot of different resources now, whether it's in church or different versions of the Bible you can buy. Like I know I have one because I started reading the Bible this year. I've never read it before. And it's one of those like break it down every day so it's not overwhelming. And it's the tradition. It's what it says. It's what happened. And then there's a little expert of, okay, so how can we apply this today? What do we see in our lives that we see this today?
So if that right there, if the Catholic Church, who is traditions heavy, power heavy, money heavy, took what you just said, which is come off of it, take a fair assessment of where we're at. And if we want to be an influential body that makes the world better, right? We get way better at knowing what our mission is, changing so that the strategies work in today, right? Mm-hmm. And that you communicate to the public so they know who it is you are. And that's really it. That's my 3-step process. If I'm the Pope, that's what I'm looking for.
So what do you think the one that we just lost was doing more
He retired, by the way. He didn't.
When he passed away?
No, he didn't pass away. He retired. we are not, we are in the hypothetical that they retired him.
Okay.
And so he's retired.
I was like, are we in
We
denial?
talked about this.
Or
We talked about
when
it.
he retired,
Yes.
what would you say was not happening that should have been?
Zero. A complete mystery of this last decade that this guy was
So
in
there's
there.
like nothing to
Like
report.
I don't really have criticisms, and I don't really know what he did. I only know
that's the point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like he was, you know, if I were to be influenced by the Catholic Church, he made a couple of very progressive statements that went towards the, you know, to what you said, like the lost sheep, the 1%. And that's really it. Like that is the only thing that was catered to. And I know there has to have been more to it.
Yeah, the only thing I really know is I remember he made headlines for saying something about being gay. I can't remember what it is. It was in an accepting way, something about the gay community. And I just remember him being in the headlines for that. I don't even remember what he said. I think that's the only time I really remember hearing about him.
Okay, so the famous Hawktua, right?
Oh, God.
Hawktua's gone away for a little bit. So if the Hawktua made a statement, what Hawktua would say would have to carry some weight to it, right? Because we haven't heard from her in a little while. There's going to be something. If she has a chance to interface with the public, the most important thing resonating through Hawktua at the moment, right? And either you're going to be disappointed, like that's what you chose to say when you haven't said shit in like 5 years, and that's the thing you picked, and that's how it would be judged. So every time you heard, it wasn't about reshaping the church and you know, making being more influential and reviving all of your, you know, your parishes that have seen, you know, decline in the people that show up. None of that. Like, so you got an interface moment with the public, and how do you squander it? Like you take the weirdest, and I don't even care if you take that angle, right? But that's the one you chose when you had everybody's attention. That's what's kind of disappointing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like over the last year, and it could just be coincidentally what I'm served in my own social media algorithms. I feel like I saw from other religious sources this information about, like, look at this revival that's happening. Look at the young people that are like mass baptisms like on a college campus or during like some youth group something. And it was like, oh my gosh, young people are finding Jesus and all these like headlines. And I'm like, oh, that's really great. But I mean, none of that I heard from Catholic Church. And again, maybe I just missed it. I don't know. But I mean, the more you talk about it, the more I'm like, I couldn't tell you anything.
That's right. So they've got a chance.
That I heard.
They've got a chance. And especially in today's times, I think people could be influenced, and they could be they could make a second revival.